Today I'm reviewing the Moza Moin camera. Now, I pre-ordered this earlier in the year and it turned up just a couple of weeks ago. It's a gimbal stabilised 4K camera with a 2.45 inch articulated touchscreen. Well, those are the headline features, but if you want to look at more specs, press pause now. But I'll just point out a few of the more important ones here. The lens has a 120-degree field of view. The camera records in resolutions up to 4K 60. The video is H.264 MP4 and the maximum SD card size it supports is 256 gigs. It's supplied with a nice hard carry case. That's something that's essential for these rather delicate gimbal cameras. And also in the box there's a quick start guide and a USB-C charging cable. And whilst you can download an accompanying iOS or Android app, it's not required. All the camera's features and settings can be accessed via the built-in touchscreen. And if you've ever used a DJI pocket camera, you'll be more than familiar with the system of swiping in from the four sides of the screen to access the various menus. The screen can be rotated through approximately 160 degrees. It doesn't need to rotate fully to face the front though, as if you wanted to record yourself, you just spin the camera around instead. The micro SD card slot is on the base, that's next to the USB-C socket, and I put a new 128GB U3 card in mine. Conveniently, the camera had turned up just a couple of days before I took a short break, which gave me the ideal opportunity to test it out and record some interesting footage. So I formatted the card, set the resolution to 4K 60, charged it up and packed it in my bag. Now, when it comes to cameras, my interest has always been more towards video than still photography. And for years, whenever I went on a holiday or went to an event, something interesting, that I'd take video and I might take a few stills as well. And the cameras that I was using for years were always along these lines. This particular design of camera, I mean, this is one of my old cameras, but I had a number that shared a very similar design to this. We'd have an articulating screen on the side. We've got this kind of vertical form factor with the lens at the top. You grab the camera around the bottom here, the thumb goes on the back and will operate a zoom ring and start and stop recording. And these cameras, I just love them. The design of this seemed ideal for what I wanted to do because I didn't want to have my whole holiday dominated by a camera in front of my face. I wanted something that I could hold more at chest height and enjoy my day, see all the things that were around me, not live my life through a screen, but also I could take a bit of video. And you can always tell with a camera like this, just because of the way your wrist works, when you're holding it straight. But you just look down every now and then, just check you've got the screen centered on what you wanted, and that was pretty much it. And I love these, and I had a number of different cameras that were along these lines. And then they just stopped making them. This kind of camera just disappeared. So I had to move to more still type cameras. Now, things like this is a Sony ZV-1. It's alright, it's got the articulating screen. The ergonomics aren't the same though. I can't operate the whole thing with my thumb. The thumb's actually on the back, so you're kind of using your fingers on the top here. And for my preferred way of shooting, having things at chest height, it's just a little bit awkward for me. I know loads of people are happy with these, good for them. And also something else that a load of people are happy with is shooting video with their phone. Most people are doing it that way around. Of course, I wouldn't do that, that'd be madness. But if we're shooting it like this, most people, they've got the phone up here and they're sort of doing it, and they're living their holiday or their experience through this screen. This is taking up their centre of their vision. You cannot really do it down there because you can't see the screen, it's not articulated. So you kind of tend to get your angles all wrong. So you have to hold it up like this. I just don't like that. I don't like that experience. Now, I know I'm in an extreme minority here. There are hundreds of millions of people that are really happy with that experience, ecstatic with this. I'm not one of them. But, you know, I'm not saying everyone's wrong. I'm just saying I prefer the old way of doing things, which is why, oops, wrong camera, bad start, which is why I got this thing, because it was like my old cameras had come back again, or at least I thought that's what it was going to be like, because we've got the articulating screen on the side. I can hold this thing at chest height. The gimbal on the top should hold the camera level with the horizon, so it should be even better than the old camera system because you can't really get it too far wrong. Also, wide angle lens on here, which the other one didn't have, so pretty much everything's in shot that's in front of me. It should stabilize out any shakes. I can operate the whole thing with my thumb. So it seems like this was the camera for me. Finally, again, someone was making a camera with the form factor that I liked. But let's see how I got on with it. During my travels, I stopped off at a number of places, including the British Motor Museum near Coventry, Bletchley Park, the National Museum of Computing, and some stately homes. So those are the things you're going to see in these clips. Now bear in mind, I didn't have any practice time with this camera. I just shot video whilst I was away and then reviewed it once I returned home. And looking back at the clips now, it's clear that if I was going to do this again, I'd really have to slow my movements down. It all looks a bit erratic. In my head, I was imagining the camera's gimbal would make everything look like a super smooth gliding Steadicam shot, especially when shooting at 4K 60. And I have used gimbals before. In fact, I'll stick a link at the top of the screen to a smartphone gimbal review I shot a few years ago. The results here just don't have that same floating feeling that I was expecting though. Oh, and here's a little bit of trivia that I learned about. This is one of the cars that the Queen used during a tour of the Commonwealth, and notice in the back the horizontal armrests. Now those are for the Queen and, at the time, Prince Philip to rest their elbows on while they were waving to the crowds. And there were quite a few of their old cars, and they all had that same configuration in them, and that explains why if you ever see the Queen waving out of the back of a car, it's quite a unique wave. It's all in the wrist. Anyway, getting back to the footage, I've got to say it didn't really live up to my expectations as far as the stabilisation goes. Of course, the low light performance was quite grainy, but that's entirely to be expected given the size of the sensor and the lens. And as you'd expect, the camera performed best outdoors on a nice sunny day, and in those conditions the colours were nice and bright and vibrant. Since there's not much in the way of audio on any of these clips, I'll just put a bed of music under this and just play you a few more to give you a better idea as to how the camera performed in a number of different situations. Okay, now let's move on to the controls. So to turn the camera on, you press the white button at the top and hold it down for a couple of seconds. The red button below that is the one that starts and stops video recording. Now, one press of that white button will switch between the photo and video modes, and if you're in photo mode, each press of the red button would then snap a picture. Now, two presses of the white button will level the camera with the horizon, and a triple press spins the camera around to face the user to enable a selfie mode. Now along the bottom there's a bit of text. It tells you the current video mode. If you tap on that, that enables you to get into the screen to change those video resolutions. So you can see here I was in 4K 60 and you swipe across either of those to change either the resolution and or the frame rate. Now if you were to swipe up from the bottom, that enables you to change between the various video and photo modes. There's a few little trick features in here that I'll show you later on. Now, if you swipe in from the right hand side, that enables you to get into some of the manual controls for the photo mode. For my photos, I left everything in full auto mode. These are also very fine hit points for a finger to accurately adjust. Now, if you swipe down from the top, you get this screen of icons. This one, for example, adjusts the brightness of the screen. I was setting mine at 3/4 most of the time, seemed good enough for me. You can also set a spot meter. You just tap on the particular part of the screen where you want the exposure to be concentrated. And then, as well as that, we've got some other icons that duplicate things that we saw with that white button. For example, if you tap this one on the left, that's the one that spins it around into selfie mode. So that's the same as tapping that button 3 times. So I tended to do things like that just with the button rather than going into this screen. This one's leveling the camera with the horizon. It was already level, so it didn't change anything. But again, that was one you can do on the white button with a double press. This one at the bottom right, that's the one that selects the 3 gimbal modes. So this first mode, as you can see, the camera stays straight, level to the horizon, unless you point it up or down. It will allow you to point down towards the floor, up towards the sky, but if you were to twist the camera, it prevents it from rolling, so you shouldn't get any diagonal shots. Now this next mode, this one will also lock the up and down, so it will try and keep everything level. You can't point the camera up or down or twist it. It will try and keep it perfectly flat all the time. And then finally, this one's called the FPV mode, and all the movements on the camera in this are allowed. So you can point it up and down, you can tilt it, but the whole thing, of course, dampens all your movements down. So it doesn't just shake around as quickly as you move it. It does everything with a delayed reaction to make it look a lot more smooth. Now this section took a while to shoot because it's quite difficult sometimes hitting those points on the screen accurately. You quite often find yourself in the menu you don't want to be in. You have to work your way back, and some of the menus you kind of swipe up to get out of, some you press an X to get out of, some you press one of the buttons. It's not very intuitive. Those hit points are a bit unresponsive, and overall it's quite sluggish and delayed. It's especially noticeable when I show these videos and photos I've shot previously. You access these by swiping in from the left. There's a significant delay that makes the navigation here really difficult. Of course, you can delete the images that you've recorded in camera as well, and something I'll mention, it does record 2 videos at the same time. There's a lower resolution one. That's the one that gets streamed across to that app when you want to view the file. So you'll find there's 2 video files for every clip. In fact, I think it's the lower resolution one that the camera plays back on its screen as well. Now, I'll just mention here that I did take quite a few photos as well as video whilst I was away, but overall I was pretty disappointed with the results. Almost all the indoor pictures were blurred to one degree or another. The camera settings were on full auto, and that's how I think most people would use a camera like this, but it just didn't seem to do a great job. But now let's move on and talk about battery life. The manufacturer quotes this as 2 hours 25 minutes. Now in my test, the camera, well, I had it recording for 1 hour and 36 in total. That's continuous recording. That's in 4K 60, that's with the screen on 3/4 brightness. But I should mention that recording for that length of time also filled up a 128 gig card. So basically you can fill up a whole 128 gig card on a full charge. Just for completeness sake, here's a recording in the slow motion mode. It will do 1080p slowed down 8 times, and you can also record in 1080p at 120 frames a second and then slow that down yourself in editing. Oh, and also there's time-lapse as well. This is perhaps not the most exciting demonstration of that in action. I really couldn't think of what I could shoot, but for time-lapse, the minimum interval you can record at is 1 frame every second, and the maximum is 1 frame every 4 seconds. Now, if you choose one of the recording lengths that's under 5 minutes for the time-lapse, you can also have the camera move automatically during the recording. So you can choose 5 positions that you want the camera to pass through during the recording process. And I'm sure you're thinking now, hold on a minute, you're not supposed to move the top of a gimbal with your fingers like that. And I thought the same thing as well, but there's no way to move this gimbal at all with either an on-screen virtual joystick or a control on the camera itself. No, there's no controls for moving it, so you have to move it manually during this process. I'm telling it the 5 points I want it to move move through during the process of taking this time lapse. And once I've picked those 5 points, I can then start recording, and you'll see the camera moves back to the first one, and then over the course of the 5 minutes that I've got it set for, it will move through all those different positions that I chose, and that's the time-lapse that it records. Now, the thing is, again, this isn't the best time-lapse because there's absolutely nothing going on, but believe me, you are looking at 5 minutes of time here that's been sped up to just a few seconds. And also bear in mind that I had to assemble a special grip in order to hold this camera to a tripod. So if you do plan on doing a time-lapse that spans hours and you want to power the camera via the USB in the bottom, which you can do, you'll have to find a way to route a cable into the base while holding the camera straight. Now, I mentioned earlier on about my preferences for cameras, how I like having this articulating screen and holding the camera at chest height like this. And initially this was just a preference. However, in recent years it's become a necessity, and that's because of my eyesight. I wear varifocal glasses, and for those people that don't know, varifocals are for people that would need both reading glasses and distance glasses. So you look through the top of the glasses and that's your distance, but if you want to read something you look down through the bottom. It becomes very natural after you've worn them for a while. Problem with that is that if you've got something, say like a smartphone, I can read it down here fine, but if I bring it up to this height to film something with, which is of course what you have to do, I can't see the screen very well. It's very blurry. It makes me cross-eyed trying to look at it. But if I put it down there, of course it's pointing at the floor, and if I try and twist it like that, I can't see it because of the obtuse angle. So having a camera with an articulating screen that I can put down here has now become essential to me. And that is something I want to mention about the DJI Pocket 2, because it's got the flat screen on the back and a tiny little screen as well. If I put it up in front of my face like I'm supposed to be able to use all the features and look at it, I can't see this thing. I have to sort of do that with my chin. It's so very inconvenient, but of course bring it down here and the screen's flat, so I can't see the screen. So yeah, the DJI Pocket 2 is for people with decent eyesight, very good eyesight to be able to see everything that's on that screen. So having a bigger screen is very useful on this, but also having it articulated means I can put it into my reading zone area, so I can see a nice clear screen, and I can also shoot the things in front of me as well. So yeah, just something to bear in mind. If you do have short sight, long sight, or a combination of both, maybe the camera needs to fit your eyesight rather than just trying to use a phone like this, because it does not work for me at all. I mentioned the DJI Pocket 2 camera a few times. It's one of the best known gimbal cameras, so I just wanted to show you a few side-by-side images of the two so you get an idea of the similarities and differences between them. But now let's move on to some of the other features of the Moza Moin. What a weird name. It will take panorama pictures, which can consist of either 3 images taken across the centre horizontally, or a total of 9 images taken in a square configuration. Now, this is the first time I need to bring the smartphone app into play, as this is what's used to download those images from the camera and then stitch them together on your phone. The only issue is that the camera saves 12 megapixel photos. That's a resolution of 4000 by 3000. However, when you stitch 9 of those together in the app, you might be expecting to get a 108 megapixel stitched image, but the one it produces is only 5355 by 3000, which is around about 16 megapixels. You get similar results if you were to stitch 3 photos together as well. And at the moment there's also a bug in the app which messes up the stitching in the bottom right hand corner. You can see it's leaving a black square. Now of course that's something they should be able to fix with a software update, but even after they've done that you'll still get much lower resolutions by stitching photos together than you might be expecting. When it comes to stitching, you're probably best just taking the photos off the memory card, sticking them in your computer and putting them into another piece of software to stitch them together there. But while I'm talking about the app, yeah, it does do everything you'd expect. You can access all these same settings you can on the camera's own screen. You get a live viewfinder, you can start and stop recording, you can access the various shooting modes, but thankfully there are no additional options in here. Everything you can control in this app you can also access directly on the camera itself. Now let's move on to a demonstration of the sound quality, but just hold on for a minute, don't adjust your volume as soon as this part comes up. I'll explain more in a couple of seconds. Yeah, I've shattered the illusion of sophistication. You're just in the garage, that's a projector screen, but I wanted to show you this to demonstrate the feel. Yeah, I wanted to play it at that level because that is the sound as it comes straight out of the camera. I found that even after boosting it in this editing package, it was still too quiet, so I've had to take the audio track out, boost it in an external program, and then layer it back in this video. So yeah, that's the first issue. The audio is way, way, way too quiet. But now let's have a listen to the amplified version of that scene. Yeah, I've shattered the illusion of sophistication. You're just in the garage, that's a projector screen, but I wanted to show you this to demonstrate the field of view on the Moza Moin. So that's what we're recording on at the moment, and the camera is on the same tripod, in the same position as the camera that I shot the earlier sections in here with, and that was a Sony a6400 with a Sigma 16mm. That's a fixed lens, of course, so there wasn't any zooming in or out. We've got the camera in exactly the same position, and it just shows you how much more you get with a 120-degree field of view. The other thing I wanted to do was record some audio directly onto the camera, because so far I haven't really been able to play you much of the audio because there wasn't really anything going on other than a bit of sort of mumbling and coughing and talking to people. It wasn't really worth including. So this is a good demonstration. Now the camera, a bit further away than arm's length, perhaps about that much further, so I'm pretty close to it. We're recording, of course, with the two microphones. I made sure to keep them both clear on this. I want to demonstrate something to you in a moment with regards to the microphones, because there is a bit of an issue with that. One of them is in the base, and I've had to make sure the base isn't on anything. Also, I've had to put this camera in a clamp on the tripod. There's no tripod mount on the bottom, and that's quite an omission. That is something that really should be there. And one thing that this camera can't do, there's no mic input, and there's no ability to attach any kind of Bluetooth mic to it, and that is in contrast to the DJI Pocket 2, with the additional bits that you can add to this. You can have a Bluetooth wireless microphone, although it does record quite quietly. I've had to boost it in the past whenever I've used this, but at least you can add an additional microphone to it. I think you can plug one in on the side there as well. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can. So the DJI Pocket 2 is quite a bit more sophisticated when it comes to audio. But yeah, just so you can hear, this is what the sound sounds like. But yeah, let's just go back to those microphone placements, because it's a little bit weird. Now, I've got to again promise you that the microphones were completely clear in that last shot. There was nothing blocking them at all. I made sure of that. But here's the diagram of the camera. There are two microphones, and for clarity I've marked them with a red and a green circle. You can see that one of them's on the bottom of the camera while the other is on the back. Now let me just show you on the camera itself where that one is positioned. It's here, exactly in the position that my thumb wants to rest when I'm recording. Now surely that is one of the worst places they could have put this. Almost anywhere on the camera would have been preferable. Now I understand it couldn't go on this top section, as that top part is metal. That's the heat sink, and by the way, that does get really quite hot, but no complaints there because it does what it needs to do. There's no need to touch it. The camera never overheated. But yes, they really should have put that mic anywhere else other than where it is. Unless you really keep a careful track of where your thumb is all the time, you're going to find that your videos sound like this. Here's another bit of poor positioning. It's the recording light, the thing that tells you when the video is being recorded. It sits under your thumb as well. Now, it wasn't that easy to see outside anyway, so the only other indicator you've got to show you that you're recording is a tiny little flashing red dot at the top left of that screen. And that's pretty difficult to see in sunlight as well. There's no beep to indicate that you've started recording. There are beeps when you turn the camera itself on or off, but they're very quiet anyway. So there's plenty of times that I thought I'd recorded something and I've looked back on the memory card and it's just not there. Now you might have noticed the fisheye effect in some of the clips I showed, where it tends to curve in towards the edges. Now the instructions made no mention of this. In fact, the instructions are pretty rubbish. But when I got home and I did some tests, I found out that the camera does automatically straighten all of the videos, with the exception of some of the more demanding resolutions, things like 1080p 120 or 4K 60 or 4K 50. So if you're shooting, say, at 4K 30, you get nice straight edges, whereas if you shoot at 4K 60, those edges bend away. Just look at the top corners of this. Now, if I'd have known that was the case, I'd have just shot everything while I was out in 4K 30 instead. I had no idea that there was this trade-off to shooting in 4K 60. And here's another issue that I only noticed once I got home and started editing these clips together. They've all got one thing in common. Have a look at the audio track which is shown below each one. Every single video ends with a loud noise, and here's what that sounds like. Yeah, that sound you hear is the click of the red button every time I stop the recording. Now, cameras I've used in the past seem to somehow edit that out, so perhaps this is something that they could fix with a firmware update. But of course, if you were to double tap that white button halfway through a clip to adjust the horizon, you're still going to hear that sound as well. That's to be expected. But then again, here's another issue. The USB port on this camera is unusually recessed, and that means that whilst the supplied USB lead will reach far enough down to engage with the camera, most of my other USB-C leads either fall out a bit too easily or don't even get far enough into the socket to provide a connection to charge the camera up. Oh, and here's something else. This video you're looking at now, this is from when I very first got the camera out of the box, and I found that it was a little bit tricky to get the screen open on the side. It clicked shut and there was nowhere to put a fingernail underneath to be able to prise it open. Minor problem, but a week later I needn't have worried. This is what it looks like now. It won't even close properly anymore. And the reason for that is, initially there'd been a little plastic protrusion, a kind of latch in the bottom, that when you close the screen, it clicked on top of that. Well, after just a week of use, it's worn that away and it won't close properly anymore. And finally, whilst the moving video I shot looked kind of okay, I was really quite surprised at how much jitter there was when the camera stopped moving on all the more static shots. These are the ones where I'm trying to hold the camera steady, and that's one of the problems with these small gimbals. Whilst they're able to stabilize movements, there's nothing dampening the tiny micro jitters you get from just holding the camera steady in your hands. So everything that isn't moving looks shaky. Ideally, they'd need to employ some kind of lens or digital stabilization for the small movements as well as the gimbal for the larger ones. So overall, I wasn't really impressed with any of the video or photos that I shot with this, which is a bit of a shame because that's kind of the whole point of the thing in the first place. Now, if after watching all this video you're still not too sure what I think of this, which I think is unlikely, I think it's perhaps more likely that some people just skip to the end to find out what the conclusion was, well, it is this. Whilst I like the concept of this camera, I like the idea of it, I don't like this execution of it at all. It's very poorly done in a number of areas. I really could not recommend it to anyone, and the next time I take a trip to somewhere interesting, I will not be taking this camera with me. There's just too many problems with it, which is a shame, because if somebody did this idea right, I think it would be my favourite camera, but this is not the idea done right. This is a poor attempt and a shoddy mess of a shambles of a product. But there you go. That was the Moza Moin camera. Sorry guys, look, if you do it better next time, I'll give it another go. But at the moment, yeah, it's a load of rubbish, isn't it? Anyway, that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.